Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the regular cover artist of Gem and the Holograms at IDW, as well as cover work on titles like Shade the Changing Girl, The Wicked and the Divine, and Josie and the Pussycats. It's Jen Bartel. Thanks for coming on, Jen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I have a whole bunch of topics I want to talk to you about, but I wanted to start at the beginning for you. You told me one of the things that people ask about you most is how do you break into this world of comics? But before we get into that, I want to start at the beginning for you. Like to figure out how somebody breaks in, it's good to start and see how you did. So, growing up, were you always drawing? Was that just something that always surrounded you?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I was definitely one of those kids that just got in a lot of trouble for drawing in class and not listening. Yeah, so always, it's been part of my life.
So basically, all of your notebooks were just completely covered with Jen Bartel early drawings.
Yes, it's kind of a miracle that I did okay in school because I I basically didn't. I think even when I was in like elementary school, I was like, this is pointless. I'm going to do art. So, yeah, it's kind of a miracle. I was an A and B student, but I don't know how.
Apparently, you filled those notebooks with very smart answers next to the really great drawings. So were you attracted to drawing for comics in specific, or was it more of a, like I love art and want to find the right fit for me kind of thing?
No, so I never saw myself working in comics. Well, I think maybe when I was much younger, because I grew up in Korea. I went to actually an international school, so
okay.
Even though my like classes and everything were in English, I was living in Seoul, and this was when like we got all of the same like manga and anime that was popular in Japan, and it was before like there were really significant Korean ones that were coming out. So
Sure.
I guess the things that I grew up with were really like, I mean, lots of like Clamp stuff, Sailor Moon, like all of the regular stuff that a lot of girls in my generation grew up with. And I guess maybe during that time, I thought I would be like a manga artist, like all kids did in like the 90s and early 2000s. And I think, there were probably a couple times in high school when I was trying to draw my own comics, and I would never make it further than like 1 or 2 pages, and I'd be like, this is just too much work, even then. So I never, ever saw myself working in comics, and I actually ended up going to the School of Visual Arts for illustration. And I thought that I was going to be like an editorial illustrator.
Sure.
And I did dabble in that for a little bit, but yeah, I sort of just like fell backwards into comics unintentionally.
So I was actually going to bring up the fact you went to School of Visual Arts. I mean, it's a super renowned program or school. I know a lot of comic artists who went there, or artists in general who went there. And one of the things I think is really interesting about like art school is like I feel like half the people I talk to have really positive things to say about the experience, and then the other half have like a lot of really negative things to say. It's like some people are like it's important and you should go, another half are like it was a waste of time, why did I do that? How impactful was the experience for you, and what are the biggest things you've taken with you from that time?
Yeah, and this is a question that I get asked so much because I feel like more than ever, um, young students, teenagers feel like they have to have it all figured out,
Yeah.
and there was certainly a lot of pressure on me and my generation, like when we were going into school, but I think now it's even worse. And so I get this a lot, and I think it's so hard to give an answer on this because it's really going to depend on each individual person. And for me personally, I wasn't ready because I graduated at 17, which means that I had just turned 18 when I was starting my freshman year at SVA.
Yeah.
And like I wasn't mentally ready to like choose a career path and like figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I think that paying like $30,000 a year to figure that out is a high price tag if you aren't ready. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of benefits, and I think I went to school with some kids who absolutely were ready. They were very prepared, and they stayed on track, and it was probably a much more beneficial experience for them because they were able to mentally put in the work up front.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of meandered until I hit my junior year. So I struggled at first, and I think that's a pretty common situation for a lot of kids who go straight into art school. So, it's tough. It really depends on who you are as a person and if you feel ready for it. And I guess the thing that I have more of a problem with, I don't have a problem with art school or, going to college in general. I think that's great. But I think society kind of pushes it on people who maybe aren't ready for it yet.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I think that's the struggle. And I think like my personal experience was, when I was in school, I mean, tuition was less expensive than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And after I had completed 4 years, like there were a lot of kids that were like, okay, what now? And we had teachers that were like, okay, well, make sure you're freelancing. And, I guess if I were you, I would be a barista part time and try to take freelance jobs the other part of the time. And I'm going, people have invested enough in their college degree to like buy a house.
Right.
And you're telling them to go be a barista part
Right.
time? Like that seems wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I also think there's a lot of pressure for kids to like instantly succeed after school too. And that certainly wasn't my path. So I think, I don't know, there's a lot of variables, and I don't want to say don't go to art school because there are a lot of valuable pieces, like some of the experiences that I had and some of the people that I got to meet while I was in school, it's invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
But I wish that I was a little older when I had done it.
Yeah.
I would have gained more.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna be real with you for a second, and like,
Yeah.
so when I went to college, and I had literally no idea what I wanted to do, and
Mm-hmm.
I went there and I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna go to school because it's kind of what it's expected of me and everything like that. And I can very distinctly remember I was like a sophomore, and I was like sitting on like the deck of my apartment building, and I went away from all my friends, and I like sat on the ground and called my mom, and I cried and told her,
Ugh.
I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. What am I doing here? I don't know what I want to do. And she's like, you just have to figure it out. And like, I ended up going to school for marketing. And the funny thing is I work for an advertising agency and online social media in like fields that like literally didn't even exist when I was in college. Like I learned
Yeah.
nothing about them. And
Yep.
I went and I now I'm also doing podcasts and I'm doing all this stuff like that. Also stuff that didn't exist. And like college didn't help whatsoever in that. And I loved my college experience. It was great. But there was also people I went to school with that like I had a friend who immediately knew he wanted to be a mechanical engineer. He went there and he's now extremely successful as a mechanical engineer, and that's great.
Yes.
I think that like, especially in 2017 when you're talking about college or, breaking in paths and things like that, I think it's important to realize that there isn't one answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more than anything, the big takeaway for me at art school or, college in general was learning how to learn.
Yeah.
Learning how to be disciplined and how to continue my education on my own. And I guess that's my main piece of advice. Like if you are currently considering whether or not to go to college and you are already a good self-motivated learner,
Mm-hmm.
then there's a lot of stuff that you can probably just learn on your own, know? But I mean, there are other reasons beyond learning, but definitely when I was at school, like the most valuable thing that I took away from it was learning discipline and how to learn by myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of the stuff, just like you, that I'm doing now, like I didn't really learn when I was in school. I taught myself afterwards.
Yeah.
So
I think it's actually I want to ask, like, so you graduate from SVA, you move on, and then like I think one of the interesting things about your career is the fact that I swear to God, like I don't know if this is going to sound rude or not, but it's just like one day you weren't there, and then the next day you were everywhere. And so I guess one of my questions is like, what was post SVA like before you got into comics?
yeah, so And it's not rude at all. I hear that a lot. It's yeah, I understand that that's definitely how the perception is. So I graduated in 2009, and I think for the first year or so after graduation, because of the pressure to immediately succeed,
Right.
I tried my hand at freelancing, and I wasn't actually getting enough jobs to maintain like any kind of stable income, but I was stubborn and I was like, I'm gonna be a freelancer. And so I was doing like little random things here and there. I like got one small gig with Nickelodeon and
Mm-hmm.
like just random things, small clients in New York. So basically, for about a year, I kind of struggled and did like small odd jobs here and there, and never really like got my name out or like resulted in any extra work.
Mm-hmm.
And so my then boyfriend and I decided rather than to stay in New York where we were paying way too much money for a shoebox apartment
Right.
and I wasn't really like gaining any clients, we decided to move back to Minneapolis, which is where he's originally from. And so that's how I ended up in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been good because I love the city. And I was kind of tired of New York anyway. So it worked out, but that's ultimately why we moved back here. And then I took retail jobs, service industry jobs, all of the stuff that I think most college graduates would look at as some kind of failure, you
Sure.
know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for like 3 years, I worked as a Genius admin at an Apple store,
Yeah.
like fixing people's phones and teaching them how to use iPhoto. Um, and then after that, I ended up taking a like an office job as a product designer.
Mm-hmm.
And in like late 2015, no, um, I guess towards the end of summer 2015 is when I got contacted about doing my first gem cover.
Yeah.
And like before that, I had taken basically all of 2014. As soon as I quit working at Apple, and as soon as I took this like office job,
Mm-hmm.
this art in-house job, I told myself, okay, it's time to stop trying to freelance. Like your current portfolio is not reflective of the kind of work that you even want to be getting anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So like stop trying to get clients, just focus on your day job and redo your entire portfolio.
Yeah.
And it was like the best thing I ever did because I gave myself an opportunity to not have a secondary income and just allow the income from my day job to sustain me.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's ultimately why we work day jobs, right?
Yeah.
To make money.
Yeah.
And so I think like for a while there, I was trying to be, it's almost like I was being greedy because I was like, okay, I've got this day job, but also I have to freelance because I have to prove myself there. And I just kept sort of failing. And so in 2014, I was like, all right, screw it. Like, I don't need to take clients. Like, these clients aren't helping me anyway, ultimately, because I'm doing like freelance work for them. And then I'm not showing it to anyone because I don't want to get more work like it.
Yeah.
And so I basically just stopped taking freelance jobs and like I gave myself deadlines. So I had to complete one illustration every 2 weeks. And
Nice.
I would like give myself prompts like I received when I was in school. Um, and it was very much like I sort of put myself through boot camp in 2014. And it was good because I was experimenting a lot. And so if I like pull up illustrations that I did in 2014, they look nothing like the work that I'm doing now.
That's amazing.
A lot of it was like graphite. I was doing like acrylic painting. Like I was just experimenting with everything, just trying to figure out like what it is that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I want to say in early 2015 is when it finally clicked, and I started doing like these really graphic illustrations of like animals, and I started doing like fashion pinups of like comic characters that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretty much just by giving myself permission to draw whatever I wanted the way that I felt like drawing it, I ended up developing a body of work that got me noticed within comics.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like I wasn't targeting it. I wasn't like, oh man, I'm dying to work in comics. I
Mm-hmm.
just was trying to figure it out, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, in mid 2015 is when I got contacted about doing a gem cover. And like I said before, I had no idea what gem was even about. I knew that it was like an old cartoon. I knew that it was a toy line. But I had never watched it, and I had no like loyalty to the show or anything. But just looking at it, I was like, oh, this would be a good fit for me.
Yeah.
I understand why they came to me now. And so the first cover I got contacted to do, it was John Barber who was editing the book at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and he contacted me on like a Thursday, and he was like, "Hey, I know we've never worked together, but is this something you'd be interested in?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure. Like what's the turnaround for it?" And he's like, "Well, I need it by Monday." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And
That's a
I was
trial
still at my
by
day job.
fire.
Yeah, so I was still at my day job, and I was like, okay. I like scribbled some thumbnails, and I was like, here, what do you think of these? And he's like, yeah, I don't know, maybe this one, and just get it to me by Monday. And I was like, okay. So at that point, I was basically just working on it, no guidelines beyond like this crappy sketch I had done. And so I managed to finish it over the weekend, and I sent it in, and they loved it, and they just kept coming back to me for covers. It was never like I was never like officially on contract or anything. They just always came to me for
That's
covers.
awesome.
Yeah, and so I just kept doing them, and I think just like the regularity at which I was doing the covers made I think I think it sort of created this perception that I was like much more experienced in the industry than I actually was,
Yeah.
because like later on I discovered that John thought I had been working in comics for a long time.
That's awesome.
Like just based off of my like new portfolio of work that I had created the year before, he thought that I had been like a seasoned comic like cover artist for a while. And he had no idea that like that first email that he sent me was literally my first job in comics
That's
ever.
amazing.
Yeah, he didn't discover that till like the following year.
Well, it's definitely not something you want to tell him, I'm sure.
No, I wasn't gonna announce it. But yeah, I think it's just I was like so accustomed to failing at things that like when I got contacted about doing covers, I just was like, all right, I'm gonna go all out. And it worked out.
Yeah, I mean, you're still doing the gym covers, aren't you?
No, actually, I just finished up. The main series ended at issue 26.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I just did the cover for 26 a couple months ago, and I am officially done with Gem. It feels really weird, but it's exciting to move on to some other things. So,
Yeah. Well, so I want to go back to some of the stuff you were saying because a lot of people I've talked to about like breaking into comics have said things like, the key to breaking into comics is just making comics. And you kind of tied into that with, redoing your portfolio. It's like unless you well, it did two things. One, it allowed you to kind of find your artistic voice and kind of how you want to represent yourself. And then two, it also showed that you could do a body of work, that you could, put yourself out there. Um, how important do you think it is to like making it into comics or breaking it into comics? Do you think it is to just like sit down, do the work, make a schedule, like have a path, like figure things out for yourself? You don't necessarily have to follow somebody else's path, but find your own path.
I think it's imperative. It ultimately like people are not going to hire you for something unless you prove that you're capable of doing it.
Right.
Right? Like nobody in any industry, but especially not in comics, has the time or the budget to experiment
Mm-hmm.
and take risks. So if you don't have a body of work that proves that you can do what they're looking for, they're not going to contact you. And like if you are expecting to get paid to develop that body of work, it's highly unlikely. Like you're at least going to have to develop some of it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other piece of this too is that if you're not willing or not capable of doing self-motivated work,
Yeah.
you probably won't last in a creative industry too long. even if you were afforded those opportunities, because like even like today, I mean, I work so much harder on a day-to-day basis. Like now that I'm full-time freelancing, and I'm not at my day job anymore, I work twice as much and twice as hard
Mm-hmm.
than I ever did when I was at my day job. And it's because so much of that is tied into like me securing future work.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big part of it. So if that doesn't appeal to you now, before you've even started, it's probably not the career path for you.
Mm-hmm. So when you were redoing your whole portfolio and everything like that, were you posting it online? Like were you like kind of forming an online foundation while you were doing that?
You know, I was, yeah. I think, let's see. This was in 2014. So like, yeah, I really didn't start to meet people like who were working within the comics industry until 2015,
Mm-hmm.
which is why it seems like I came out of nowhere. Because before that, I was pretty involved with like the illustration community,
Sure.
which it's like this weird Venn diagram where there's like this tiny sliver of crossover,
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle, but for the most part, like illustration people and comics people are like two very separate groups.
Yeah.
And I think most of the crossover happens like within the indie scene.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for me to be working kind of more in like the mainstream area, but to have come from illustration, um, while it appears like I came out of nowhere and like I just started doing a bunch of work, I had experience with like freelancing and with doing illustration before I was working in comics. So a lot of that just crossed over and just applied.
Mm-hmm.
And it may have helped me to appear more professional than I actually was. So, yeah.
I do think it's funny when we have like this perception that people come out of nowhere. Like one person I had on my show was Tom King, who's now writing Batman.
Oh,
And
yeah. I was on a panel with him in New York
oh,
last
that's
year.
awesome. Oh,
Yeah.
it was the Art Cred one.
Yeah, with Declan.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. So I had Tom on my show, and like one of the things I was quoted in this article, like this big feature on Tom for this website called The Ringer, and I was like, oh, he had one of the fastest 0 to 60s out of anybody in comics, and like secretly he'd written a novel, or not secretly, but he'd been grinding in the background for like 5 or 6 years to get into comics, and
Yes.
it's like. To the layman, to the David Harpers of the world, we're like, oh, he came out of nowhere and now he's writing Batman. But he was like, when he came on my show, he was like, well, that some people think that, but it was really a lot of work that nobody saw that got me there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a very common story. For sure.
I wanted to ask about like the internet, the global internet, like social media, your website,
Yeah.
everything like that. I have to give you mad props. Like I think there's a lot of different ways. That's like the theme of this podcast. There's many different ways you can do things, but I really love the way that you handle your social media presence and also your website. I love your website.
Thank you.
Your info page is so useful. It is like you can go there, you can see everything you've done, you can see your con appearances, everything like that. I'm like, I really like comic creators should take a page out of your book and like do websites like that. But it's obviously a big factor in getting your work in front of people these days. For you, how important do you think the internet, social media, your website, everything like that? How important do you think that was in kind of helping you break into the global comic sphere?
Oh God, I think it was like practically the whole reason. Yeah, for sure. I think that like I wouldn't suggest to anyone to be like dishonest or like present yourself um in a way that's like an outright lie, but certainly like put your best foot forward online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't know, it sort of depends on each social media network, right? Because
Sure.
like I find that when it comes to like Instagram and Tumblr, I'm not very like personal on those platforms. I don't really engage with people.
Mm-hmm.
I find that they make it kind of difficult, to be
Yes.
honest. Like it's not the easiest to actually interact with people. I guess Instagram has like now added the feature to like reply to individual comments,
Mm-hmm.
but they still don't have like a comment section in your notification center. So like I don't know where those comments are.
Right.
So yeah, there's just like those two platforms don't make it very easy. And so I tend to just use them as like secondary portfolio sites
Sure.
where I post art and that's kind of it. But Twitter has been this like bizarro like platform for me because before I was like really active on Twitter, I was like a very, very private person online. I wasn't, and that's another reason why it probably seems like I came out of nowhere because I wasn't really posting anything personal online.
Sure.
But there is like such a demand for it, and it's really strange because I feel like now more than ever, like people. So like I post pictures of my dogs sometimes on Twitter, like I'm sure people have seen. And I swear people follow me for that just as much as they follow me for my art. In fact, I think some people follow me for the dogs more than the art.
They're like, stop all those covers business. Get the dogs back out here.
Absolutely. It's so bizarre. And I mean, like, I just never expected it. And I don't know. I've received a lot of like questions about like career stuff on Twitter. And I think just like the ease at which you can like interact with people on that platform has made it easier to be like personable.
Yeah.
And I think that like the more people know about you as a human being, the more likely they are to like support you in this industry. It's very strange because like illustration is not like this at all.
Right.
Like nobody like is a fan of an illustrator unless you're like a fellow illustrator.
Right.
Then you like their work, right? But like no one picks up like Business Week because an illustration is in there. You know what I mean? Like that's not a culture that exists in illustration. And so coming from that and into comics, there's like people who will follow creators and collect all of their work no matter what they're working on. And like a lot of us in this industry survive off of that, you know? And so I think it's hugely important to try to like curate kind of a fan base or like a support group. I don't know. I hesitate to even call them like fans because I know that's like standard terminology, but it almost like
It's
in
more than
my
that.
mind, like, yeah, it is more than that. And I feel like the word fan almost like dehumanizes them a little bit. Like they're people who are like actively supporting your work. And like last year, I started making a lot of merchandise. And like I wouldn't be able to like successfully sell my merchandise if it wasn't for my online presence and for people who actively like support me online, you know? So yeah, I feel like I owe all of my success to the internet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the Twitter thing is totally real. Like, I find that, like, especially because we're living in this time where creator owned and like Kickstarter and all these different things are more important than ever. Like,
Yes.
it gives people an avenue. Like, you can build a fan base and then, or like a friend base. And then you can like those people follow you from project to project because they're invested in not just your work but also who you are. I think one of the things that is really interesting is you kind of tap into one of the areas that gets the most ongoing support based off of just like the individual. Like covers are huge. Like if you have a Scotty Young cover, people will buy. Like I know comic shops that say that they have customers that have Scotty Young all. They just buy all of his covers, regardless
Yeah.
if it's on like I don't know, like Batman, or if it's on Gem and the Holograms, or if it's on Giant Days or whatever. And I find that happens a lot with cover artists. So I bet you see a lot where people tweet you pictures of like collections of like, here's all my Gem and the Holograms covers complete.
Yeah.
And I
For
think
sure.
I think that's pretty cool.
It is. I mean, it's like so flattering. And I don't know, just considering that like less than 2 years ago, I was working a day job and like had no idea that I would be in comics. And like it seems really surreal that
Yeah.
people even care, you know? So I'm always like really humbled by it.
I find it to be really. I love the idea that illustrators would pick up Business Week for each other or something like that. That would be great. There
Oh,
are
that
like
is a thing.
well, there are a lot of really great comic creators. Like Kagan McLeod is a guy I love. He does like
Hmm.
amazing. He did Captara with Chip Zdarsky, and he did
Oh,
Infinite
yep.
Kung Fu, and he does magazine illustrations, and he's just phenomenal. And I don't know, there is like some intersection there, but you're one of the rare total crossovers. Um, so I wanted to ask, like, we've kind of talked about your story. We've talked about in generalities, kind of like what you could learn from that and everything like that. But I wanted to ask about the breaking in idea. So,
Yeah.
with the internet and crowdfunding and social media and more, the gatekeepers and decision makers that have like, I kind of feel like there's like less sway, that like the gatekeepers have less sway in the rise of comic creators. So considering all that, what do you typically tell people when they ask about breaking into comics?
Yeah. Well, I think that like it's kind of weird because it's almost like we're in high school a little bit,
Yeah.
where there's different graduating classes of
Hmm.
creators, right? So I think like when you are like if you are trying to break into comics, you've made the decision, and I can really only speak to it as like an artist. I don't know how writers break in. That's a huge mystery to me
Yeah.
because like as an artist, I can be like, "Hey, look at my work," and I can like shove it in front of people and force them.
Yeah.
But as a writer, you need some like initial investment to get someone to even read what you've written, you know?
Yeah.
So it seems much harder, and I can't speak to that. But as an artist, um, one thing that I think people really should consider is kind of what class of like graduating creators they belong to. And I guess like what I mean by that is um, the most valuable thing you can have is a peer group.
Hmm.
And if you can identify kind of where you fit in and where you belong, not just stylistically, but also career wise, like if you're just starting out, it's probably going to be fairly difficult to like edge your way into a friend group or a peer group of much more established comic artists,
Sure.
right? Because like chances are like they're going to have a lot more to offer you than you are going to have to offer them.
Right.
Not to say that everything is like a give and take, but at a certain point like there's only so much time that people have in a day.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so like this is always like the difficulty when people on the internet are like, why can't we be friends? And I'm like, well, I don't have unlimited time. um, so the biggest thing for me was finding a peer group that I got along with really well, but also that my work kind of fit in with. And the reason why that's so valuable is because like once you feel close enough with people to be able to like talk about your work with them, you gain so much knowledge just off of like how they're doing things, and you're able to help them as well. And for me, like definitely starting to develop friendships with people like Paulina Ganeshow and like Chris Anka. Like Babs and I do shows together. It's just like having that peer group has been a huge help
Hmm.
just across the board. And I think like a lot of artists starting out kind of treat themselves like they're islands.
Yeah.
And it's already a really isolating career to choose. Like it's kind of a lonely endeavor. And so to do this all day long and then to not have the support of anybody is exceedingly difficult. And so I feel like one thing that you can do to really kind of like help alleviate that is to find people who are in your same boat and to come up together with them, you
Hmm.
know? And if you guys help to raise each other up, like you're going to be the next class, I
Yeah.
guess. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that's actually good advice, but it's the path that I took, and it has worked for me. And I think that there's a lot of people out there who are just like seeking a peer group, you
Yeah.
know? There should be some service to like match people up. Like
Friendster for
some
comic
kind of like,
artists.
yeah, like comics dating service, but not dating.
I like that idea. Well, I mean, that actually kind of ties into one of the things I was going to ask about, which is, I think that people are intimidated about breaking into comics because, I mean, both for like institutional reasons and like personality based ones. And like, they're totally understandable. And if you have a friend group that like you can kind of lean on when the times are tough or when you're not feeling it, or if you just don't want to push on or something like that, I
Yeah.
feel like that helps a lot. It helps you motivate yourself. It helps you find how to push through that feeling, and I think that's an added benefit. Is that something that when you were trying to like kind of get in? I know your path is different than a lot of people, but did you ever kind of have that feeling when you were kind of breaking in?
Oh my God, 100%. Yeah. I mean, even now, like now that I've been working in the industry for, I guess, close to 2 years, I'm still like, I don't know what's going to happen in a couple months. It always feels like I'm just one step ahead of complete failure,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah, I think having that like emotional support is it's necessary.
I think one of the funny things about like the idea of breaking in is like there's a lot of people like I would, from my perception, somebody like you has absolutely broken into comics. But I bet if I asked you that question, you'd be like, "Have I? I mean, like entirely?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it
what
doesn't
is
feel that
breaking
way.
in?" Yeah,
Right. Well, I think everyone's definition is probably a little different. And like for me, I've done a lot of cover work now and I've drawn like some issues.
hmm,
Um, but like for me, breaking in is now going to be like crossing into sequential work.
sure.
And it's terrifying. But I'm really excited. I can't really talk about it yet, but I do have a project coming up that
Hmm.
hopefully will be getting announced soon-ish.
That sounds
Um,
exciting.
yeah, and I will be doing sequential work for the first time, like seriously. So,
Well,
very excited.
you did a couple issues of Gem and the Holograms, and you also did your the comic for Stila Chaos
Yep.
Arena Crystal Fighters. I was curious when you started with comic or with covers for the reasons we already covered, but was not working in sequentials like full out. Is that kind of by choice, or is it just kind of how it's worked out so far?
It's a little of both.
Sure.
I've definitely been very selective about where I've been willing to do it.
Hmm.
Just because it is so labor intensive. Like,
Yeah.
depending on what the project is, like there's just no way that you can kind of have it all, you know?
Hmm.
So like if I want to continue doing like 10 covers a month, like I can't also draw an ongoing book.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of it has just been me trying to be selective and trying to prioritize what makes the most sense for me at that given moment.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, like a big piece of it too is just like it's like what we were talking about earlier, right? Like if you don't have it in your portfolio, people aren't going to come to you for
Hmm.
it. And so I'm certainly not known for like doing sequentials,
Hmm.
so people don't tend to ask me,
Yeah.
which is okay. But I would like to start getting into it now.
Hmm. I was actually reading an interview with you where you were talking about how you preferred like the autopilot stages of inking and
Oh
coloring,
yeah.
and I think I mean that is 100% a real thing because it seems like there's like a real line in the sand. Like some artists prefer like the inking and the coloring and all that, and other ones are just like I love getting in there and solving the problems on the page. And like
Yes.
it seems to me like those people are like kind of wired a little bit differently just because it's so intense. Like you have to be so actively present and you have to be figuring things out like that. But I was curious, like, why is it that you prefer that autopilot side of things more?
I don't know. I guess maybe because it feels like it's more quantifiable.
Sure.
Like it feels like I can quantify the amount of work that's getting done.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, when I look across all of the things that I've accomplished, it feels like I've done more,
Mm-hmm.
even though that's not necessarily true. But like, I think sometimes like the hardest part for me when I'm doing a cover is coming up with the ideas,
Sure.
right? Like that's always been the hardest. And so I will spend just as much time like coming up with sketches and ideas as I will like inking something.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that part is hard for me and it it's easy for other people, and sometimes like the other stuff is hard for them.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's always been like the conceptual stuff that's the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, once I get that done, it's like each stage gets like easier and easier where like more of the legwork is done. So like my brain has the opportunity to shut off more and more and more. So by the time we get to like the coloring stage, I'm just like not even mentally present anymore. I don't know. It's easier is the answer.
Well, I mean, I also think just looking at your work, and like this may be an assumption that's entirely wrong, but it seems like looking at your work that the inks and like the colors is really where your pieces come to life the most.
Yes.
Do you feel it is so that you feel like that's a true statement?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and like that's interesting because it's like everybody kind of has like a different process, but it seems like going back to your origin story of, hey, I need this cover by Monday, it's Thursday, and you throw out a bunch of sketches, and then you make it work in your inks and you make it work in your colors, and I think that I don't know, I mean, it just makes sense for kind of what you do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's another reason why I've like struggled so much to get into sequentials because it is a team effort and I am so used to like inking and coloring my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's become pretty rare for like people to get inkers. I guess unless it's like big two biweekly shipping comics.
Yeah.
But so I like even though I ink my stuff, at this point, even working with a colorist is like daunting because I've so seldom had my stuff colored by someone else. And like there's like a different way that you need to draw when someone else is coloring it, Like
Yeah.
you have to give them more information. And I'm so used to not having to do that because like I know that I'm gonna color it and I know that like I know how it's supposed to look. So having not learned that language for colorists yet, it's like really scary to pass it off to someone else.
Right.
So yeah, that's another reason why I've been like kind of hesitant to like start collaborating with colorists more.
Well, I mean, your work is very. I mean, to me, I think it's very heavily defined by the color choices you make. I think people know you for neon. I mean, just googling your name, I swear to God, like half the titles have neon in it.
Yeah.
So I imagine, like for a lot of artists, I remember talking to a very very popular artist who was saying that like they would actually put like detailed notes into like Photoshop layers to say, or like whatever they were using layers to say like this is how I want it and everything like that, and it's rigorous, and like it's because they're so precise because they're used to painting themselves that they like really like they're mortified of like this beautiful work they've done being ruined by a colorist or something like that. So I mean, I think that that's something that's real from like the newest creator to the longest in the industry veteran.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also think like I don't know, we're entering a time where there are like so many talented
Oh,
colorists
it's
working right
ridiculous.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, like even the last 5 years or so, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the number is just like skyrocketed. But yeah, certainly there's people who I would absolutely trust, like sight unseen. Like I've like talked to Matt Wilson about his colors an ungodly amount. Um, yeah, and like Matt is a person that I would be like, oh no, please, please, do whatever you would like to do because like he is just an insane genius when it comes to colors and like the care that he puts into coloring each artist that he works with is like it's all there quality wise, but
Mm-hmm.
style wise is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's able to kind of chameleon to whoever he's coloring
Yes.
is like I think the greatest skill that he possesses. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing more and more colorists emerge who kind of treat it the way that Matt does. And so I'm really excited to see like where the kind of the colorist part of this industry goes because I think that people like Matt and like Jordy are like kind of mentoring people too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's only going to get better.
I swear to God, my podcast always turns into the Matt Wilson fan club podcast. But I love
He's
like,
so good.
yeah, you look at like something like Wick Div, and then you compare that to like like kind of like the flatter colors he does on Paper Girls, or you
Yeah,
look
or
at like
Black
Black
Widow.
Widow and everything like that. Yeah, I mean it's like you could easily think that there are three different colorists based off of what he's doing on those. Although I would have guessed that he would have been somebody that's up your alley, given the fact that he is clearly a deep fan of the neon with Wick Div.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I would love to someday work with Matt. And we've talked about like having him color a cover at some point, but we're just like waiting for the right one.
Sure, yeah.
So someday.
Someday. I wanted to ask actually about the neon. You clearly are a fan. I know that Lisa Frank comes up a lot in your stuff, or
Yeah.
in conversations, and everything. Where does that love come from? Like, where does that like the bright neon affinity come from?
God, I think just like an unabashed love and nostalgia for like the 90s.
Sure, yeah,
Probably. I don't know. I just think about like when I was a little girl and how much I loved like collecting Lisa Frank stuff and like how much I was drawn to like anime posters that were super bright and colorful. And like kind of how that made me feel. And now I just want to make other people feel that.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I certainly have like done stuff that's not neon, but I think like maybe it's just because it like stands out so much, it forces people to like look at it and remember it.
yeah.
But that's definitely what I'm known for the most. Yeah, and I don't know, I like it. It's probably just a result of me being a kid of the 90s.
No, totally. I mean, honestly, like, I think it's funny how the stuff that when we're young influences us, like, going forward. Like, I grew
Yes.
up, I was a huge Final Fantasy fan growing up.
Yes.
And like for some reason like there's like this song that played in like Final Fantasy 2 or Final Fantasy 4 I guess it was Final Fantasy 4 when you're flying on an airship, where every time I hear a song that sounds remotely like that in like popular music and stuff, I like that song like 75% more. And I call them airship songs. So like it means like there's a song by Rufus Wainwright that I'm like obsessed with, because I'm like, this is the ultimate airship song. It's
That's
amazing.
amazing.
um, anyways, but so I just have a couple more questions before some questions about you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about your merchandising. I had planned on getting you my podcast anyways, but I was recently talking to somebody. They're like, you have to get Jen Bartel on your podcast to talk about merchandising because she's so good at it.
Oh God.
But I mean, people like your "Don't At Me" Twitter pins are
Oh
enormously
my God.
popular. They're awesome, and I think
Thank you.
it's a way to bring in money without having to endlessly be creating art.
Yes.
When did you first decide to start going down that path? And has it, it's externally it seems successful. Has it been in a fairly successful additional venture?
Yes. So, Emerald City Comic Con 2016
Hmm.
was the first comic convention that I had ever done or been to. um, and I had a friend tell me that I should apply for like a pro badge at that
Hmm.
show because I had done like a couple gem covers at that point. And I was like, oh, okay. And like I'd heard really good things about the show. I had never, like I said, been to a convention before. I didn't know what to expect. And so I applied for a pro badge. And the team at ReadPop reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want like half a table? Like we can give you half a table if you want one." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I don't know what that means or what I need to do, but oh, okay." And so I was kind of just thrown into the convention deep end. Um, and I did like tons and tons of research, and I like had anxiety attacks over it, and I had like 2 months to prepare, and I was like, okay, oh God, what can I do? What am I supposed to bring? I don't know. I think I'm supposed to have prints. I think I'm supposed to, I don't know. And so I ended up like doing a an illustration for the Emerald City Comic Con Monsters and Dames like charity book.
Yeah, those are great books.
Yeah, they're awesome, and it was my like witch with like the two Sphinx cats.
Hmm.
And after I had done that illustration, I was like, okay, I should probably use this for like my banner because it's going to be in the book, and so people can find me easily.
Hmm.
And then I was looking at it, and I'm like, maybe I could like do an enamel pin or something. And like this was before everyone was doing enamel pins.
Yeah.
Not to say that I like started it or anything, because there were a handful of people who were doing them at the time, but it definitely had not become like the craze that it is now.
Yeah.
And so I was like, maybe I'll just try like one just as an experiment. And so I like found a vendor and like made my first pin, and I ended up going to Emerald City Comic Con with that pin and that print and like some gem issues. And like people freaked out over the pin. Like everybody wanted it, and I like sold out of them, and I was like, oh, there's something here. And that Emerald City was like the first time where I realized that like all of the crappy jobs that I had ever worked in my life culminated into like this one moment where everything made sense, because like every crappy like service industry and retail job that I've ever had, where I had to like interact with customers and like be on my feet all day and do like product displays and like sell to people, and like my time as a product designer, I was doing like home goods, you know, like mugs and pillows. um, but like my time doing that gave me like a little bit of insight into how to do my own. Um, and so it's like everything that I'd ever done up until that point, including like drawing comics, resulted in me having like a really good first convention experience. And I realized, oh, this is like actually an avenue.
Yeah.
Like this is an opportunity to like take all of the stuff that I've learned in the last like 6 years of me having day jobs and apply it to my comics career. And so I just like jumped in all the way. And so last year, like it felt like every show that I did for like the month before it, I was scrambling to like come up with new merchandise and like get things developed and printed on time and get it to the shows. And since then, I've opened my web store. Who do you know Andrea DiMonacos?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know of her. We're not BFFs or something.
Oh, she's fantastic. She came up to me at New York Comic Con and she was like, "Hey, Jen, why don't you sell this stuff online?" And I was like, I don't have the time or resources. Like, there's no possible way that I could like do comics and also like package and ship all of this stuff and also make it. Like, there's just no possible way. And she was like, I think you're leaving some money on the table. And she was like, why don't I do that stuff for you and we'll just work out like a percentage or something. And I was like, I don't know why you would want to subject yourself to that, but okay. And yeah, since then it's been fantastic. And I think there is a lot of demand for it online, and like not everyone can make it to a comic convention to buy stuff.
Yeah.
And even like buying stuff at a convention is kind of stressful too, because like you have to find the table, you have to get there early enough to make sure that the merch is still there. Like, I don't know, it's just kind of a stressful buying experience.
Yeah.
So the fact that I've been able to offer it online has been like definitely has grown that part of my business a lot. And it is a very large part of my business, which like when I made that first enamel pin, I was like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe, I don't know. And now it's like a significant portion of like my annual income. And I think that like it's the best thing that I've ever done to kind of diversify beyond just drawing comics or just doing covers. Because like, I think it was probably Ted McFarlane that said it, but like everyone's ticket is up sooner or later, right? And like, I think we don't need to be negative about it, but like it is a reality.
Yeah, you gotta
that,
be realistic about it.
Yeah, that like drawing comics 12 hours a day is not sustainable for like a 50-year career.
Right.
So to be able to like have other revenue streams and to be able to do things outside of that, I think is good for everyone. I think everyone should try to do it. And yeah, it's been working pretty well for me. And I'm glad that I did it.
I've always been kind of amazed that like merch wasn't a bigger part of comics before, but I guess it kind of needed the I don't know, current more evolved form of the internet to be able to make it a real thing. But that's another thing I want to really give you credit for is you talk to a lot of comic creators, and it's like there's like there's a group of people who say, you know, don't do, you know, work for exposure, and don't do this, and you should never, like, you know, not get paid for something, or and then there's other people who are saying like sometimes that's part of what you got to do. And I think that you've done a really good job of never devaluing your work and finding a way to like continue to, and maybe I'm completely wrong about this or something, but you've done a good job of finding other ways to make it so you don't have to be a slave to a drawing table, and that you can find different ways to like bring in revenue streams and stuff like that. For, you know, last question, for advice to budding creators, do you think it's important to establish your own value and like not just take answer, you know, like you have to learn to say no, right? You have to learn to establish your own value by saying no and saying, this is what I'm worth.
Yes, and thank you. um, I think that it's the scariest thing in the universe to say no.
Oh yeah.
Because when you say no, like I said no for the first time like this year.
Oh wow.
I was like exceedingly bad at saying no because I was so terrified that like if I said no, it meant that the stream was going to just dry up.
Yeah, and then
It
the
meant
word's gonna
that like
spread.
yes, that I was never going to get offered another job ever. And like the first time you do it is like the scariest thing in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes like the minute you get the next job offer, it's like the most liberating thing in the world because you're like, the world didn't end. I said no to something and something else came along and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And like, actually, I guess last year is the first time I said no. It was like, it was late last year, almost December. I turned down like actually a very big for me, I guess, gig, an ongoing gig
Mm-hmm.
that I would have loved to do, but like circumstances just wouldn't allow it because of like scheduling. And so it wasn't that I said no because I like wasn't interested. I said no because I just couldn't. There was no way that I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucked. It was like so hard to say no to it, but and I thought that they were gonna be like furious over it. I thought they were gonna like blacklist me and like never want to work with me again. But their response to me saying no was, "Oh, that's a bummer. Well, let us know when you're free because we want to work with you."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I think most people understand like comic schedules are hard and not everyone can commit to them. Um, and so just knowing that like I wasn't blacklisted and like things were okay afterwards was really good. And I think it's scary for especially like young artists to turn something down because like it really does feel like you won't get offered anything again,
Yeah.
but you will.
Mm-hmm.
You will.
Yeah, no, I think it's important for people like in all industries, because like the internet, for an amazing place that has made it possible for people to get reach that they wouldn't get otherwise. Also, people really hate paying for things on the internet.
Oh my God.
And so, like, I'm going to be totally honest. Like, it took me 7 years of writing about comics and getting in podcasting and doing stuff like that to make a single dime off of comics.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm just really passionate, Jen, which is probably something I shouldn't admit. I'm like, you guys got to pay me now. I've been paid. I know what happens when you get paid. It's great.
Oh no, once you get paid, like you can't not get paid anymore.
Yeah, there's no more turn back that clock.
Yes.
I'm out on that. But it is super important. But anyway, so I wanted to close the podcast, with 5 questions about you as a person instead of you, the creator, because I don't know. I always find it funny that it's like. I feel like you know a person through Twitter, but you don't really, in interviews like this, it's normally like, tell me how you feel about Batman or something
Sure.
like that. So I want to ask you about Jen Bartel, the person. And this is the most important question I've asked you this entire time. It's super important and near and dear to your heart. You love dogs.
Yes.
You have been quoted as saying how much you would love to be a dog trainer. I want to ask, how did your obsession with dog training first come to be? And could you ever see yourself becoming a part-time artist, part-time master dog trainer?
Oh my God. So, So we lived in New York. I lived in New York for 5 years. And like before that, I lived in Seoul.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never lived in a house before we bought our house a couple years ago. And so I've always just lived in apartments and I've never been able to have a dog. And so when I was a little girl, all I wanted was a big dog. That was like the only thing I cared about other than art. And it just could never happen. And so when we moved to Minneapolis, I was like, we're gonna get a house someday, and I'm gonna get a dog. Like this dream never went away. And so for like 5 years, I like researched dogs, like obsessively, like trying to figure out like what dog I was gonna get, like what the perfect dog for me was. Um, and so in that time, I like learned an absurd amount about dogs and about dog training. Because like basically I would just like fantasize about owning a dog. And so finally we bought our house a couple years ago, and like the first thing I did before we even closed on the house was like pick the dog. um, so yeah, it's been like a lifelong dream and passion of mine, and yeah, so we got Freya a couple years ago. No, like a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we kind of unexpectedly got her sister like back in December.
Mm-hmm.
Eden is actually Freya's half sister.
Oh.
And she was born with a mild case of congenital vestibular disease. And so basically what happened is she came from the second litter of Freya's mom. And I had kept in touch with Freya's breeder. And she was kind of like holding on to Eden for a while because she wasn't sure if she was going to make it. She wasn't sure if she was going to be okay in a home. Like, you know, there were just a lot of variables.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually when Eden reached a point where she was healthy enough and our breeder felt confident that she would do okay, she tried to find a home for her, but like no one really wanted her because I mean, I understand it's kind of a big undertaking. And so we were like, we'll take a second. And now we have two dogs that are like almost clones of each other, and they are amazing, and they eat up an absurd amount of my time every day. Like one thing that I get a lot is like people think that I'm really productive. And I guess I do have like a fair amount of output, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I think about like how much more productive I could be if I didn't have two dogs who were like hyperactive and needed like constant attention throughout the day.
Yeah.
But it's amazing and I love them, and like I think that maybe like someday if I retire from comics, I'll just like try to be a dog trainer for fun. It'll be like my retirement job.
Yeah. So once you reach the Todd McFarlane point that he was talking about, that's when you move on to being like a Westminster Dog Show dog trainer?
Yes, when my ticket is up, I will be a dog trainer. Yes.
That's amazing. So next question, I want to ask about cons. You know, you've only been going to them for the last couple of years, but I'm sure you're very well aware of the fact that they're insane sprints within marathons of commerce and socialization. They're also great fun. What is your favorite part about con life?
Oh God. Well, I don't know. It's probably just being able to like see everyone in person because
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like all day long we like kind of hang out on Twitter and like people kind of chat throughout the day. But once you actually get everyone in the same room and everyone's like a little drunk, there's so much more fun. Yeah, I don't know. It's just getting to like have all these creators under the same roof, hanging
Yeah.
out in the same space. And I think like, I don't know, I always feel like simultaneously really exhausted, but also super invigorated after a show.
Yep.
Because like you're physically tired, but you just got done like talking shop with like 40 different people you admire. And it's like so inspiring and so invigorating. So it's great.
It is a really weird combination of emotions when you come out of a con. You're like, I'm going to do the best work of my life, but
Yeah.
after I take a 64-hour nap.
Yes, and also you're probably sick with con crud.
Almost
so
certainly. Almost certainly.
yes.
Next question I have for you is: you recently were talking on Twitter about overworking yourself as an artist, which is a very common thing.
Oh yeah.
I've talked to a lot of artists, and they tend to say it's good to have something to break away with from time to time. I have a feeling I know your answer to this, but for you, what's your favorite activity to just step away from work and recharge for a bit?
Yeah, well, it's definitely the dogs. Like, I mean, it's kind of like not optional for me. Like, I
Right.
have to. They're both, like, Eden is not even a year old yet,
Mm-hmm.
and Freya's not, she's not two yet. And they're both white shepherds with very high energy levels. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, they have to, like, be mentally stimulated. They have to go outside and do stuff. I think if I didn't have dogs, I would maybe just work like 14 hours straight.
Right.
So it's actually like I should be thanking them.
So in a way, they're kind of like therapy dogs.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like before I had dogs, I would work like ridiculous stints.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where like I would forget to like get up and stand at times, and it was bad. So no, I think it's great. I think anyone who has trouble like getting up and taking breaks during the day should get themselves a dog
Yeah.
because it helps.
There's one.
But
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, other than that, I mean, like, I can't do the video game thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people I know who can play like an hour or two of video games and then like go back to work. I am also like a Final Fantasy person
Nice.
who will play for like if I'm playing a game, I'm playing a game and I'm like sucked in for 72 hours. Like there's no I can't control it. So like video games are off the table. Can't do them. Um, but I do like watching a movie now and then,
Mm-hmm.
just to like kind of disengage a
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
There's one artist or cartoonist. His name is Ben Towell. He did a book for Oni Press called Oyster War, amongst other things. Great artist, and he listens to my show sometimes. And whenever he, like, I swear to God, whenever he tweets about it, he says he's like, oh, this morning's dog walk listen off panel episode with so and so, and I'm always like, that is like the best advertisement for getting a dog that I don't have a dog, but like every time he tweets about that, I'm like, I want to listen to more podcasts. I need to get a dog just so I can walk them everywhere and be like, yes, time for podcasts.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's like the other thing is I try to consume as much stuff as possible while I'm working. And
Yeah.
I think that's the other reason going back, why I like the autopilot stages so much. Because like when I have to like actively think, it's much harder to actually like absorb information. So if I
Oh
have like a
yeah.
podcast or an audiobook playing, I'm like, I can't do this. But if I'm just inking, I can listen to anything and I can like have video on and stuff and it's fine.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's why I end up listening to so many podcasts because like I don't know, I find that like music is okay, but if I can be like learning something,
Yeah.
I'd rather do that. And so yeah, I listen to like a lot of podcasts and audiobooks
Hmm.
while I work.
That was actually going to be my next question. I was going to ask like whether like you're a podcast person. So it sounds like you engage with podcasts and audiobooks a lot. Now here's a like one thing I've noticed lately. I'm gonna change up my question.
Yeah.
One thing I've listened to a number of podcasts. There's this one woman who her name is Rachel Nichols who comes on a podcast that I like a lot. She's a ESPN sports writer, TV person, et
Okay.
cetera, et cetera. And she's a big podcast listener, but she listens to podcasts at 2x speed so she can like actually get through a lot more. And I've
Oh my
actually,
God, Marguerite does that. Marguerite Bennett does that with audiobooks.
yeah, that's
And I was rooming with her at Emerald City, and like she was playing one like not on headphones, and I was like, I don't know how you do this. This is like stressing me out.
I was listening to another podcast, and this person said that they listen at 3x speed, and I was like,
Oh my
what?
God.
So I was going to ask, like, you're just a 1x person?
Oh God, yeah.
I feel
I
like
can't. No.
I feel like it takes away from like the experience. Like you're like these people are going at a specific cadence for a reason, and if you're listening at
It
2x
does.
speed and they sound like a I don't know like a hyperactive squirrel, like I don't think that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, totally agree. And like I think, if you're doing it because like you have a limited amount of time where you can actually listen and you like want to fit more in, I get it. But I'm like very thankful that I have the luxury of being able to listen while I work. Because I
Yeah,
know like writers can't do that.
yeah. Words on words
But
is bad.
yes. So I'm thankful that I don't have to speed them up.
I feel like to a certain degree, maybe the people who have to like listen at 3x speed might have a slight addiction to podcast problem.
Yes.
So last question I have for you. You're a big fan of girl gangs. What is your favorite fictional girl gang throughout history?
Oh my God.
And you can think about it. I can edit it.
I'd have to say Sailor Moon though. Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just I have to. I know it's probably like the thing that like most people would think of and it's maybe a little cliche, but it was so formative for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about like how I think I was just talking about this recently, how there's been so little Western media that like actively shows girls being friends with each other
Mm-hmm.
that like having access to Sailor Moon as a kid was like hugely important to me because it like more than anything else showed that girls could be friends.
Yeah.
And I think like so much Western media like actively pits girls against each other or it just like has women featured as like a love interest or like a narrative tool. And I think that's why there's so many women who are like really hungry for it today.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if this like really counts, but as I was thinking about like Western media that features it, I thought about Buffy, but like a more recent and like maybe not as obvious version of this is actually Parks and Rec,
Oh, yeah.
where like Leslie Knope has her own little like circle of girlfriends that she brings together and like you've got like April and Donna
Yeah.
and oh my God, why am I forgetting her name?
Oh,
Anne.
yeah. Beautiful Anne.
Yeah. That like otherwise wouldn't be friends with each other, but like she kind of like forces friendship upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And like they all end up really close at the end, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it's so rare to see like media portray that. And so
Yeah.
I guess my answer would have to be like Sailor Moon and then also Parks and Rec.
Yeah. I mean, I think Valentine's Day is an awesome thing.
Yes.
I actually, I don't know why I've always wanted to have this, but I've always been envious of people who have like themed sketchbooks. Like, when you go to cons and you get different artists to draw it. And I actually recently rewatched all of Parks and Rec because I was just kind of down about the world and the government for some reason.
Ugh, it's the best.
Yeah. And it's so good. And I was like, I should have a Parks and Rec themed sketchbook. That would be amazing.
Oh my God, you should.
I know. And actually, I talked to Ben Dewey. Do you know Ben Dewey?
No.
He does this book called The Autumnlands for Image with Kurt Busiek and Jordi Belair, and he's a great artist and he's like phenomenal. Like that book is very heavily about anthropomorphic animals. Like most of the cast is that, and I was like, he would do a pretty rad little Sebastian.
Oh my God. Yes.
Oh, I love Little
I feel like
Sebastian.
this needs to happen.
It does.
And I bet you like everyone that you took it to would be like actually really excited because like everybody loves that show so much.
That is one of the tricky things about themed sketchbooks, though, is like, what if this person is like, I'm sorry, I was more of a office person or something. I'm like,
Oh my God.
you go right to hell, sir. You're out.
Exactly. You can't speak anymore.
That's the only proper answer when somebody chooses The Office above Parks and Rec.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's all I have for you, Jen. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Jen Bartel. You can find Jen on Twitter at HeyJenBartel, on her website at jenbartel.com, her online store at jenbartel.storeenvy.com, as well as on Instagram, Tumblr, and a whole slew of comic covers. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all of my existing patrons, including Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Heifel, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Stables, Chris Morris, Johan Barander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Battaglia, Alec Bernal, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.